Once again, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's lovely to see you here. And in fact, you may think we're being short-measured. We're not, because Lucy, standing of Brave Starts, and Mike were doing the presentation tonight. But in fact, we've just got Mike. And that's still a joy, because Mike is, in fact, beaming in, so to speak, from Amsterdam, where he's been living for the last 20 years, which I admire and envy. I've never visited Amsterdam, so I was trying to egg him along, and perhaps we can come and see him during the year. But the gist of this is, are we an ageist society? And to my mind and view, the answer is manifestly yes. And you may recall that, in fact, it was Lucy who gave us a presentation in May of last year on the age of opportunity. And she focused at that time on the huge fact that our population continues to age and pension provision is drastically under-resourced. There is an increased anxiety about encouraging the older worker to remain engaged at work. But I wanted to follow this on, and that's why I'm delighted to have invited Mike to present us tonight. So without more ado, Mike, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Steve and Bob, and nice to meet everybody. We've got a good group tonight, but a reasonably small group in terms of manageable for a discussion. So let's keep this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to maybe interrupt as I go through the presentation, but we will definitely make time afterwards for your input to collect your thoughts. So kicking off the topic today, if I was to ask the group, maybe you can either put in the chat or maybe shout out, if a few trends or mega trends that you thought were impacting both our society and our workplace over the coming years. If you could maybe tell me some that you spring to mind in terms of ones that you think are going to have an influence for us.
Population growth.
Well done, population growth. Thank you, Heather.
AI is going to have an effect.
AI. And it's often AI. So somebody put in often the ones people speak about are AI, the impact of technology, and the green transition. But not as many people, and maybe I've got a primed audience here, immigration, absolutely another one. Population change and the impact of demographic change isn't always one that springs to people's mind, but it is one that is going to have a significant impact, both on our society, our retirement system, as well as the population, the care we give each other, but also on the workplace and how we prepare for an aging workplace. And that's really the starting point of what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to share my screen, if I can do that. Here we go. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, indeed.
Yep. Okay. So the population, what we want to talk about today is the multi-generational workforce and how we can map the way forward. What we'd like to do in terms of the session, in terms of takeaways for you, would be that we share some insights on the research that we've been doing on how organizations are preparing for an aging workforce, but then also to discuss some of the ideas on what we can do to attract and to retain older workers. So maybe before we start, we'll just introduce myself, and I'll do it virtually as well for Lucy, who can't be with us today. But at ProAge, we are a charity in the UK, although I do live in the Netherlands, a charity in the UK, and we're focused on reducing the exclusion of older workers in the labour market. And the way we want to tackle that issue is we want to help organizations become more age-friendly and age-inclusive so that they can leverage the skills and experience of older workers. And Lucy is tackling much the same issue, but really helping the individual, people who are 40 and above, figure out what their next job might be or what they would like to do next in terms of a contribution to society. So we're really trying to make, at the ProAge side, sort of that warm bath that allows people who are members of Brave Starts find employment opportunities going forward, and hope that we can tackle some of the issues in terms of that are facing society and the workplace by doing so. So let's take a look at some of the issues that we're dealing with, and we touched on demographic change a few moments ago. So I was born in 1964, and since that time, life expectancy at birth in the UK has increased by 10 years. And we've traditionally lived our lives in the UK and in many Western countries along three phases. An initial phase where we spend time in education and training, a phase where we are working, and a phase where we may be retired. And the dates through which we have entered and left those different phases have stayed very much the same while life expectancy has increased. So life expectancy and the increases in life expectancy have really been added. Those 10 years have been added to the end, to the retirement phase, rather than spread more evenly throughout the different phases of our life. And that has caused some issues for society in terms of additional strain on our pension system, but also other issues that impact people as they get older in terms of lack of economic opportunity and social isolation and other issues as well. So our aim is to see how we can open up the conversation and rethink how we live our lives, move away from that traditional three-phase approach to life where we can dip in and out of work and not work, whether it's retirement or taking time out for family during the course of our life in a way that makes longevity and the dividend of longevity work better for us. At the same time that we have increased life expectancy, birth rates have fallen in the UK and around the Western world as well. And the impact of that is that society is getting older. So that change in society is also changing the workplace. And we can see if you look at the changes in the demographics of the UK labour market since the early 1990s, that the real growth in people in the labour market has come from people who were age 50 and above. So in the period since 1992, there's been an increase of 4 million people who are 50 and above in the workplace, compared to an increase of only 2 million in the people 25 to 49. Now that really is, or should be, a wake-up call for employers in terms of where the growing number is in terms of employees going forward now and going forward. We can see that 30% of employees in the UK are now over 50, and that number is set to increase. So employers really need to think about how they develop employee value propositions for older workers if they're to attract and retain the talent they need to innovate and develop going forward. So that's a summary of some of the changes and the numerical changes that are going on in the workforce and in society. But if we turn to look at how the labour market itself is changing, we can see some changes there too. And that has come about in terms of the attitudes people have to work. And before I worked for ProAge, I used to work for Aegon, the insurance company, and led their retirement research program. And this information comes from work we did back then, looking at the UK. We see that 66% of employees, so 2/3 of people, feel that the idea of a job for life is a thing of the past. And that really is showing that our relationship with work is moving away from that idea of what we might have had a generation ago, where we might have looked and aspired to a career with a single employer or a few employers for a prolonged period of time. And our relationship with employment is becoming a little bit more transactional. Work by the OECD has also shown that the average length of tenure at employment has reduced by about 9 months between the period of 2012 to now. So you can see there's a little more change in terms of people's movement in jobs from employer, but also within jobs and within the same company. And this change is also manifested in terms of people's attitudes to retirement. We can see that only a third of people in the UK, or less than a third, now see retirement as a cliff edge event, an area where they may be working on Friday and are retired on Monday. The majority, 57%, expect some form of a phased transition to retirement, where they're going to continue working in some capacity as they get older. And they're doing that for a variety of reasons. It can be for economic reasons, but also for reasons of staying socially connected, keeping the brain alert, and staying involved in work as well. So for positive reasons. And that's something I think these changes in the labor market are something that employers can capitalize on in terms of thinking about resource planning going forward, seeing that there is more flexibility in the labor market, and that idea of somebody as they reach their 50s or mid-career don't necessarily have the same idea of a stop when that might be compared to what they may have a generation ago. And that sort of light bulb moment, I don't think has dawned on people, or certainly not as bright as it should be with people. So the other area that is interesting is that from that piece of research was that only a third of people feel that their employer is not doing anything to facilitate that multi-generational workforce. And that's a number we really need to get up in terms of making sure that when we have an aging workforce, that we not only leverage the skills of older workers, but we also make sure that there's intergenerational and multi-generational collaboration. A topic we'll discuss next week in more detail, but just to sort of put a line in the sand and maybe get you thinking about it for next week. It is a very important part of what makes a workplace thrive and flourish going forward, is that intergenerational collaboration. So looking at some of the other challenges that are facing the labour market in the UK, we can see that at the moment, and for the past couple of years, we've had a persistent number of around 3.5 million people who've been economically inactive between the ages of 50 and 64. And that's quite a high number, given the fact that these people are not drawing benefits and they're not earning money. The challenge that brings is that for the individual, they may not be putting enough money aside towards their retirement, given that they are going to be living longer and have to save and make the money last longer. But these individuals are also not contributing to the economy and a missed pool of resources for employers. So the Office for National Statistics, this number, 3.5 million, came out in 2023 and is pretty much the same. I remember the same since then. In 2022, the ONS did some work and looked at people who had left the labour market during COVID and hadn't yet returned. And what they found was that 58% of people would consider returning to work, which was very positive. But the reasons they give for returning for work, I think, belie some of the changes that we need to think about when we think about the impact of changing demographics on the workplace. And they had a lot to do with flexible working options. So the most common option people gave for wanting to return to work was flexible working, 32%. Good pay, not surprising. Everybody wants to make money. But the third reason was also a flexibility-related topic, in terms of 12 people saying they wanted to work from home. So I think this shows that, again, there is a change in the labour market in terms of not only how demographically it's changing, but the fact that the nature of the people's attitudes to work is changing. They see themselves working longer, changing jobs more often, and being more flexible. And that, I think, shows a little more elasticity that I think we can benefit from. So the next question I think to think about is the impact of demographic change on people's radar? And maybe before I look at the statistics or the information that we've collected, it might be interesting to hear your thoughts so far on whether demographics or changing demographics is something that is being spoken about at your organizations. If anybody's prepared to share some.
I'll jump in, Mike, massively. I'm in the healthcare profession, so it dominates my life.
And in what way, when you say dominates, is it dominated from the perspective of the employers looking to hire people who are older, or seeing a skills shortage that they're trying to fill?
Certainly not the former. In fact, quite the opposite for the former. And we can discuss that at the end of your talk, if you like. There is, in the NHS, there is an absolute ageism and no incentive whatsoever to work beyond the age of 60. Certainly senior medical staff, it costs us money to work beyond the age of 60. It's madness. There is a real issue about finding people to go into the healthcare environment. And the biggest issue, as you have highlighted, is that by the time my children get to my age, we're going to have twice as many people over the age of 60 as we are in work. And that is a problem because most of them are going to require care. And the prediction is that you're going to need over 50% of the workforce working in healthcare to provide that care. So who's actually going to make the money? It's madness.
Yes, ma'am. And that is one of the slides. I mean, there were so many slides I could have used to introduce the topic, but the old age dependency ratio is definitely an issue that is going to put tremendous strain on society. And in terms of the how we pay for healthcare and provide healthcare is going to be a very big challenge for us going forward. Work does help us stay socially connected, helps reduce social isolation, and has a very positive impact on people's mental health as well, which can help reduce in some ways the impact it might have on the NHS going forward. So thanks for sharing that. So we look just in terms of what organizations are telling us about what we found from research on how age is being considered. So 4 in 5 organizations have not considered age as part of their DE&I strategy, which is a very high number, given that it is a protected characteristic under the UK Equality Act. And 1 in 8 organizations, plan to look at age over the next 5 years, which is very few as well. So we can see that it's an issue that is not being looked at already, but very few organizations are really planning on being proactive. Given the demographic changes that are happening, this does seem like a missed opportunity, and the fact that we are burying our head in the sand, not to put too fine a point on it. The UK isn't alone in this. Information from the US has very similar results. Only 17% of organizations in the US have considered the needs of an aging population. Again, so it is a prevalent issue. So Lucy and I have been thinking about this and wondering, why are we finding it so difficult to get the topic on the agenda of organizations, the NHS, other organizations around the country? So we did a survey where we asked 225 organizations around the country about how they were preparing for an aging workforce. And we were very fortunate in the survey we did. We got a very nice mix of organizations, both by size. So we got everything from small micro organizations, 0 to 50 employees, to organizations that were quite large, and organizations that, if you look at the type of organization, were anything from an SME to nonprofit, public sector, large multinationals as well. So a nice mix of organizations. The first question we asked them was, how important was it to prepare for an aging workforce? And they told us it was very important. So the numbers here, 44, 24, and so on, represent the number of people who scored this question based on a scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, where 10 was, we gave it the criteria, yikes, I need to get this sorted yesterday. And 0 was, it really wasn't important at all. So 7 gave it a score of 7.2. We saw, looking at my notes here, that the public sector were more likely to rate it a little bit higher. They rated it 8.3, and SMEs rated it a little bit lower in terms of 6.8. But still, they're strong scores in terms of pointing out that this issue is important. What we did find was that there was a disconnect. So it is important, but when we asked how ready they were for an aging workforce in terms of their preparations, the scores went right down. So they came down to 4 on average 4.3 out of 10. And here again, we saw that SMEs were and public sectors were a little bit more ready than other types of organizations, and the least prepared, strangely enough, was large UK organizations and multinationals, which gave it a 3.4 and a 3.8 respectively. So this disconnect is something I think that we do need to work on, and it is reflected in terms of the status quo, in terms of how people are thinking about the topic going forward. We asked, of the 9 topics that are covered by the UK Equality Act, where does age fall on your priority list? And it came in persistently number 4. And I was watching the scores as they came in from the very first couple of people that answered, and age stayed at number 4 right throughout the survey fieldwork, which showed me that it was a very consistent answer in terms of people's prioritization. Ethnicity, gender, and disability came in more highly. And I think you can see that if you look at the websites and the DE&I pages, the careers pages of many organizations, you can see a lot of talk around ethnicity and gender, sometimes around sexual orientation, but very little about the topic of age. And that, I think, is a missed opportunity, because of all the characteristics that we have in common, of all the characteristics, age is the one that we all have in common. So solving for age is really going to help solve for a lot of other characteristics and sort of bring that culture of inclusion into the workplace. What we found was that many organizations weren't engaging in the topic, and we asked why they weren't engaging. So a little bit of a pop quiz here to see what people thought might be the 2 main reasons for people not engaging on the topic of age inclusion. So we gave them some options like no resources, no clear business case, other areas taking priority, not a win, not an idea, or no idea was an issue, and lack of confidence. So any thoughts in terms of which might be the most common 2 reasons they were given?
No idea. It's an issue.
I think I'd go with other D&I areas taking priority / not a PR win.
Yeah, they were 2 good. There were 2 ones. Anybody else?
So I've gone for no idea. It's an issue. Steve here.
No idea it's an issue. Okay, thanks, Steve.
I'd go with no business case. People don't understand why they need to be engaging around it.
And that was Joe. That was one of the main issues. So here were the answers that came back. Other areas of diversity are more of a priority, and I think that is a tribute in many ways to the fact that people have been speaking about DE&I based on topics that people have thought long and hard for, in terms of equal pay, recognition for the contribution of women in the workplace, racial issues after George Floyd and all the issues we've dealt with over the past couple of years. But age is a slow burn and something that people really haven't had on their priority list yet. So you can see it, the main issues there are around prioritization, but the business case. And I think that's an area where we can really help organizations understanding the impact that changing demographics are going to have on the workplace and how we need to address those. So what we've done is we asked people what they were doing to get ready for an aging workforce. And in my mind, when I looked at these results, what I found rather interesting about them was the most common answers here were offering flexible work and personal development sessions targeted at supporting career development. They were two items that personally I'd categorize as items that are required by law, because since April of this year, it is the law that anybody in the UK can ask for flexible working arrangements or accommodations for flexible working arrangements from day one of their employment. And personal development sessions targeted at career development are just plain good HR business practices. You have to go down to number 4, developing age-friendly or specific benefits to see that people are really thinking about the issue or conducting an audit. But the numbers of the 225, you can see the numbers are low there, or lowish there, in terms of what people are doing to specifically understand the issue. So before I move on to what people are thinking of doing next, I was just curious if people had any comments or observations, either from their own organization or their own experience on what they see here in terms of what's happening in companies today.
Sometimes we've had people buddying up, young people with older people, to capture some of the corporate memory. Yeah,
that's a really great initiative, mentorship as well.
I think William's got a question.
Please, William.
Hi, mine's more of a point, thanks. I have a business down in Kent, and even the other day I was wanting to know who in my local village might be interested in working on in my business here, because they could bicycle to work and therefore reduce carbon. And my experience is that there are a number of people who fall into this bracket of anybody, frankly, over about 55, who lives out in the countryside, is completely stuffed. And so actually the response is, I suspect, going to be quite good.
Do you mean you might need some support from local government or local authority to help with?
No, I'm finding that I can find people who I think I'm going to need, who can help the business, who are local and are not going to have to be a negative on other things like carbon usage and matters like that. So that they're there, and it doesn't. Don't need support. I think they're available. I think it's just a matter of asking. And there are so many people who I'm finding, particularly men actually, who I've spoken to, who are finding that they can't find work after a certain age, and so they're available. And if you have a local business out in the countryside, then the chances are you'll be able to fill it quite quickly with people who are local.
And are you developing specific benefits or ways of attracting those types of people in terms of how you get in touch with them?
Well, a lot of it's word of mouth, because you know, we're a developing a state, frankly, and so eventually we turn into a brewery and distillery based on the land and what we can grow and produce here, but with a biodiversity background and so on. And so it's I actively need to start to replace those who are getting genuinely too old to do work outside, but I can also do that by looking at for people locally who want to stay fit, have a life that's engaging, to do something. I was even today next to visiting another farm that was over the hill, and they had a big biodiversity project, and I was asking them how they felt about it, whether it had given them a new lease of life in the second part of their lives. And all of them were saying yes, because they'd had to become more knowledgeable about matters they hadn't had to consider before. And as a result, anything that can link education to having that balance between education and work, I think is a good thing.
And I think what you're saying as well is the people that you're recruiting and you have employment have a connection with the business, have a connection with the ethos and that you have within the company in terms of the connection with biodiversity, protecting nature, and so on. And that is a big way of connecting with people on an emotional level that gets them to.
Yeah, it is a holistic piece of thinking, because actually, you know, the mind of people, if for instance we have people who are visiting and they're visitors who need a tour or something like that, I need people who can not only know what we're about and what we're doing, but also know what they're talking about. And that means that they've got, you know, to know not only about the place that they live in and what it does and how, you know, how it operates and its history and culture and all the rest of it, but they also have to know the detail of the material that they're looking at. So it for most people who have, because we're, you know, 30 miles from London, most people have been getting on the train and going into the city for the last for their life. So now there's an opportunity to do something completely different.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Nigel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, you were looking at your graph. In the NHS, about half of those things that you've put there have been looked at by the NHS. But it is for the NHS, which is the biggest employer in the UK, it comes down to three things. It comes down to making it financially viable and sensible for people to continue work, because at the moment they are disincentivized to do so. It is managing the workload as you get older, because there is a massive drive that the workload should remain the same for everyone.
Yes.
And the final thing, unfortunately, is managing the managers. We had a conceptual change in the NHS about 20 years ago, and we now have the tail wagging the dog and not the other way around. There are now more administrators and managers in the NHS than there are people who actually see patients, and that's just wrong. And we need a system where people are allowed to get on with their work and do it properly and feel valued to do so, and not continually be managed by people who have no idea.
And I think that feeling of self-empowerment, able to do what is important to you, what provide the care that you want to do, is very important for helping people feel that they are making a contribution as well. And I think back to maybe the point William was making in terms of how people want to connect with the business and so on as well. But the point you're making, Nigel, about culture, I think is very important, because we're looking to see, we asked what people were planning to do over the next 5 years. And the nice thing about the responses that were more forward-looking was, to my mind, they were more, they had a nicer spread in terms of people experimenting and looking to think about different ways of doing it. But they were more data-driven and they were more culture-driven. So the most common response was actively collecting and monitoring data on the needs of employees over 50. So really, I want to understand what this group of employees want, so that I can develop an employee value proposition, attract and retain them as well. But the second one was training managers on being more age-friendly employers. So that really spoke to a shift in the culture, in my mind, of the organizations, to make sure that they were being more age-inclusive for the individual, and making sure that they were developing the sort of work practices that allowed people to manage their workload, have that work-life balance that they needed. Many of these benefits, I think, are also going to have a knock-on effect in terms of benefiting people of other at other ages to manage aspects of their life and make sure that they can continue to work for longer, which is something that we all are going to have to do going forward. So the last point we asked people was about whether they were focused on attracting or retaining individuals. And interestingly, so it was a 61% of people said that they were more focused on retaining people compared to 39% who were recruiting people. And I think that goes to show that at a time when there's a skills shortage, a lot of organizations are really trying to nurture the talent and resources they have rather than start going out and trying to bring in new resources. Looking at the different types of organizations, we can see that the dark blue line in all instances is higher than the light blue line, meaning that all organizations were more focused on retaining individuals. That again goes to culture to me in terms of making sure that you're creating that inclusive culture where people feel they can thrive and continue to work for your organization. So they were the key points of the presentation. I'll stop sharing my slide now before I ask into the questions to see if people had any thoughts or reflections before we start asking for some of your input.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll sort of field the questions into you as discussed. I mean, I'm going to pinch one to start with myself, actually. Your very last slide there where you talked about people focused on retention, not recruitment. I mean, the interesting thing when I do a lot of work with Deloitte University as a training organization, looking at particularly their middle senior management leadership and the retention of Gen Z, for example, is a really big challenge because they don't really fancy that. They want to move around and they want different careers. And I'm just wondering how that marries up. You know, I can completely see that with an older sort of selection of the world workforce, but you know, there's different needs in different generations now.
There are different needs, and I think from an organizational point of view, the more you can retain knowledge within an organization, nurture and develop it, the stronger it's going to be in terms of for business continuity, as well as other aspects as well. But we were looking more at what people were doing, focusing on older age categories, 50 and above. In the survey, but I do think the idea stays firm across all generations that retention is much better than the churn you get with having to bring in new people, train new people, and get them.
I 100% agree with that. I just think that the challenge that goes with that is that, you know, with youngsters in particular, you're seeing them not really wanting to do that. They want multiple careers and moving around quite regularly. So, you know, that is definitely a challenge for the you know, for the future, I think, for sure.
That is true. And I think that's seen out also in the work done by the OECD, where they found that tenure within organizations across different generations had fallen by 9 months, which is quite a lot in a period of 10 years.
William, please.
Just a quickie, because I've already used a bit of time. I think that it's really important to retain those who you want to retain, and one of the ways to do that, but at the same time attract in those who are going to be better than the ones who are no good or don't fit. One of the ways that we spend some time encouraging and talking to people is the education side of getting them trained up. But another is to encourage people to do more than what they just do here with us. In other words, have another job somewhere else, because that experience brings stuff back to us as it does to ensure that they're feeling that they're doing something for themselves as well. Thanks.
And that sort of allowing people to have portfolio careers or other interests is something that can bring a lot into the organization in terms of different ways of thinking about things and approaching problem solving that can be a great benefit for organizations as well.
Yeah, for sure.
It goes a lot to the flexibility that we were speaking about.
Yeah. Karen, please.
Hi. So I'm publishing a prediction tomorrow, which is always a mistake, having a prediction, that looks at the convergence of health, wealth and longevity and the need to collaborate to build a resilient economy. And a lot of the research that Mike's presented and other people have talked about, I've reviewed exhaustively to understand some of the issues. But I also work for Deloitte, as my background shows. I must take that off when I come onto these programs. And Bob, my take on what you're finding from the Gen Zs is Deloitte's model is to work young people really, really hard with the dangling in front of them of a partnership at the end of the day. And in order to have that, you've got to retire at 60 if you're a partner. So you can't, you can talk about valuing the older age population, but it will undermine your own business model if that is the model that you're having. So just thought I'd throw that in. Don't tell anyone I said that, but that's my own view, because I'm not in, I'm a director in Deloitte, but I run a very small research team that has nothing to do with the general model. But
I think it's a really fair point, but I think the related point is what I see a lot at the senior manager and director level. So that's typically in age group terms, 30 to 40 with some outliers in either direction, is they're a lot less interested in becoming a partner than they would have been 15, 20 years ago.
And I agree, because I think that is, and I do agree. But one of the things that's come out in the research that I've done is this sort of, and it's not just for the UK, it's a global prediction, because many countries are facing the same problem, because they have a retirement age which varies between countries, but it's a fixed age, and it doesn't take into account that some people at 60 could be as able as another person at 70 or 75. And so it's not reflecting that. But there was also one other piece of research I did a couple of years ago, looking at the sustainability of the healthcare workforce. And I met a number of older people who would have continued to work, except there was no flexibility. And that flexibility wasn't in where they work or how many hours they work, but it was more linked to the job that they did. And I always remember two people who were both anaesthetists who would have loved to have carried on working, but they said the expectations of an anaesthetist to work very long shifts, very little flexibility at all, meant that they just physically couldn't. And so there is something about needing to identify new ways of working that embrace the different capabilities. And it's not just age, it could be some of the other different distinctions. So as I said, I think that the problem is closer than we think in terms of needing to look at the age of the workforce, but also create conditions for continued employment. And I suppose the good side of Deloitte is I'm still working, and I'm a lot further past the retirement age.
Well done, you.
I mean, I worked before. Early on in my career, I worked for it was at that stage it was Ernst & Whinney, or EY, and PwC, and very similar model to what you outlined there, Karen, in terms of that sort of rapid trajectory. You come in as an associate, work your way up, and the pyramid is quite steep once you get up to the top. And the model is very much up or out. The challenge is, again, that they had very similar experiences in terms of when people left. And it goes down to job design. They did try, but it was a very hard sell. They tried to adopt a model where you had the up or out approach, but the also stay and contribute model, which was they wanted to encourage people who were maybe mid-career, see if they wanted to continue doing the work they were doing, but didn't necessarily have the ambition to become a partner, if there was a way for them to stay in that role. But the challenge was that the culture within the organization, or at least the organization I worked for, was so focused on the fact that if you weren't being promoted, there must be something, maybe I'm being a bit strong saying wrong with you, but there must be a reason you're not being promoted, and you weren't getting invited onto the interesting assignments, which was hampering your ability to do the sort of job and work you wanted to. And I think it has to do a lot within organizations in redesigning jobs, so that, for the example you had of the anaesthetists, that they are able to work in a way that suits them, but also to make sure that culturally we value the contribution of people as they're making it.
Yeah, and I have seen some models where people like an older nursing workforce are being redeployed willingly, because this is what they want to do, to use the technology of monitoring patients either in hospital beds or at home remotely, so that they continue to use their skills but without having to have that physical drain on their ability. And Deloitte do have trying to keep, allow people to come back to work and add to it, but very few do. So I think it's very hard to go from being top flight partner to coming back and being an advisor or a supporter or whatever.
Yeah.
And my husband worked for Ernst & Young and was caught up in that trap you just mentioned.
It is. But the thing is, at the point when people are reaching the age when many people retire in professional services firms, their network is at its best in terms of their sort of little black book of contacts, in terms of business development, in terms of understanding how the process works. And to see that knowledge exit the firm quickly can be a big drain. And if there was a way to nurture that and transfer that within the organization, would be a great benefit, I think, for the organization and for the individual.
Agree.
Matthew, please.
First of all, Mike, apologies. I came in partway through your presentation. I was at a meeting and I just couldn't get to you on time. So many apologies for that. I'm from the charity sector, and so I see things quite differently sometimes to some of my colleagues here. Interestingly, before I sort of go into what I wanted to say, I used to work in the housing association field, and they see the elderly as being 55 plus. And I think that's quite an interesting statistic that they use. But anyway, we'll move on. I was really interested in what you were saying in the last slides about retention and retaining people. In the charity sector in particular, I'm more involved in the volunteering side rather than employees. And retaining and developing volunteers is a big thing for us right now, primarily because we've seen a 20% drop in people volunteering since COVID. So that's one in five people have dropped out of volunteering since COVID. That's quite a serious statistic. Interestingly, it's mainly the younger generations that have fallen out. If you've got volunteering opportunities for people to swipe left, swipe up, swipe down on their mobile phone, or just to click on signing something that goes off to their MP, then you'll attract the younger generation very quickly for that, because it's an instant thing. But actually turning up and rolling up sleeves and regular commitment, we've seen the younger generations drop out almost completely. So it's only really the more elderly side of our work that is maintaining and keeping our business going, which I think is actually quite interesting. So if you've got people in your sectors above a certain age that you're wondering what you can do, please send them my way, because I've got quite a lot of opportunities to fill up with volunteers at the moment. So hopefully that's somewhere in the mix for you. But retaining people, certainly of an elder generation, and still developing them where they want to be developed, is really quite high on my radar.
And I think it's something that a lot of charities are working with. I had a conversation a couple of months ago with a charity that does an awful lot of community work, and they found very much the same thing. They found that the average age of their members was in their late 60s, but they were really struggling to bring in new members as well, and had tried to develop a corporate program where they were working with organizations that had a volunteering program, so that they might be able to encourage people to sort of try before you buy, do a volunteering day to see if the topic was of interest to them, and try and get them involved in contributing or joining as volunteers that way. I'm not sure if that's something that might work, but it was a nice way to encourage some mentorship, but encourage a lot more involvement from people in different age groups as well.
I mean, charity retail, so the charity shop side of things, you know, it grows steadily year on year on year. Despite any recession, it still grows. And that sector could not survive without the 50+ age group.
Yes, no, I agree. If you go into any charity shop on the high street, it's often people who are older doing it as well.
Thanks very much.
I spent many Christmases with my mum and dad were heavily involved in UNICEF, and spent many Christmases at the UNICEF shop trying as a young teenager selling Christmas cards for them. But I was the complete exception compared to anybody else who was selling in the shop as well. Yeah. Keith,
There's quite a few things in chat that I'll pull out in a minute, but Keith first, please.
Mike, good evening. I've really enjoyed listening to your talk, and also I was scribbling away trying to look at the statistics and remember them. I think I saw briefly a bar chart that kind of implied that SMEs, for example, worry more about retention than they do about recruitment. So I have a slightly odd question, which I mean, I'm a volunteer myself and an oldie, but my gut feel is that, you know, and I don't think you're recommending positive discrimination in favor of people like myself, but have you got examples of organizations that you may not wish to name where they have struck the right balance between those in mid-career and those who are past retirement age? Because I would really worry if I was an SME that I could get myself, there's a strategic risk associated with relying on people who may be very good at what they do, but frankly, maybe, you know, there's a risk about health, there's a risk about determination to continue. And I kind of think, why would you do that if you could find a way of getting into those who are economically inactive, because they'll be around for longer and offer potentially more potential? Sorry about the tautology.
It's you bring up a very interesting point, and I think SMEs sometimes, because they're smaller organizations, the numbers in terms of the breakdown by percentages of people of different ages might be more skewed than a larger organization that's more reflective of the population. I think what we're really trying to strive to achieve is to have that multi-generational workforce, where you have people of all ages and experience sharing knowledge for the benefit of the organization, because they are more reflective of the community in which they work. They're more reflective of the customer base in which they're serving, and they can understand the thought process. Finding ways to make that work is very good, and certainly not advocating for positive discrimination. What we have seen is, and there was an article in the Times yesterday along these lines showing that in terms of recruiting, more than half of recruiters thought that people over the age of 57, which is still 10 years, pretty much 10 years before retirement age, were too old for the job. So what I'm trying to do is to open people's minds to the fact that hiring older workers has benefits in terms of their skills and experience. But once we get them in, let's make sure that we leverage those and make sure that we have that proper intergenerational collaboration to make it work. I do have one or two examples of how organizations who have brought in older workers and changed their work patterns have made it successful, but I'm not sure if that answers your question a little bit, Keith, in terms of where the emphasis is.
I think it does, because what I was thinking about is skills transfer and not actually employing people just to do stuff, but to transfer their skills to those who may be younger than them and may benefit from development themselves.
And that skills transfer is so important because in a survey done by the CIPD, they found that 79% of employers in England and Wales felt that older workers were very important in that skills and knowledge transfer with younger workers. But it's making sure that you have that resource and you tap into it through good mentorship programs and good ways of multi-generational working. That is the best way to make this work for everybody.
Thank you.
William, I'll come back to you in a minute, but I'm conscious
it's literally on this point.
So go on then quickly.
Okay, so it's the way that you employ people. You don't have to take them on full time. You can get them to come and contract. I've got 120 different people who have different things that they come in to do, and one or two of them are flexible. So it's just a way of looking at how you employ people.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Alistair, I'm conscious you've put a few things in chat that I was about to bring out, but you're probably going to bring out some of those yourself now. Yeah, over to you.
Thanks for that. Good to see you again, Mike, and everybody.
Thank you.
Paul. I'm particularly interested in perception because there's two things going on here. First of all, that millennials are now very much in the driving seat when it comes to organizations. Somebody mentioned it earlier on in terms of they are now the management, they are leading HR functions. So their perspective on the different generations is making a big difference. And one of the things I'd be interested in your research is what the different generations themselves can do to improve the perception of their generation. In other words, they're not all snowflakes and saga louts.
It's a very good question, and something that when we do trainings, we often work with organizations to sort of look at the stereotypes that people have around people from different generations and see how we can pick them apart to understand what is actually a myth and what actually is something that is a characteristic or a skill that somebody may have based on their age that we can leverage. So finding ways to demystify or debunk some of the myths are very important. And that often comes from storytelling and having examples of people from different generations who have done something that is perceived to be unexpected. Whether it's somebody who might be an older age doing something related to technology is a great example, but there are other examples that can show interpersonal skills from people who are younger that really make a big difference as well. One thing I would say then why it's important, I think, to really address some of the issues around age and perception of people from different generations is the point you made, Alistair, of many people in management being of the millennial generation or the Gen Z generation, that we've often found that people are less likely to hire people who are older than them, maybe for fears of managing somebody who they may perceive to be more like a parent than a colleague or an employee. And that's why I think it's very important that we find ways to demystify some of the different conceptions we have about people from different generations so that we can make that work a little bit better.
Nice. I'm just going to pick up on Nick put a question in, or a comment in chat, really, not a question, which builds on what Karen was talking about earlier on with the pyramid type stuff in professional services firms. Just in case you can't see it, I'll read it. The pull through is important to manage workforces effectively and sustainably. What this looks like depends on industries. For example, military and other physically demanding roles are balanced towards younger folk with mandatory retirement ages. Others, like Karen said, need to control the pyramid to provide opportunities. I'm certainly looking at my kind of military leaning. The military has changed. I mean, it used to be mandatory retirement at 55. It's now 60 in almost all all walks of it. And that's the kind of norm. And even then, there's flexibility around that with certain trades and professions and ranks that people can go beyond it. And certainly looking at the Deloitte angle as well, there is flexibility around it. When equity partners retire early, but but others and quite a lot of the ones in my experience come back into advisory kind of roles and things like that as well. So, just Nick, I don't know whether you want to add anything, but interesting perspective.
No, I think that's exactly. I think I've got similar leanings to you as well, Bob. But the idea of dragging myself up a Sanger in Afghanistan at 48 degrees centigrade and full body armor at 61 is a little bit unappealing, to put it mildly. But I think my point is there is a balance, and I think we need to go in open-minded. And I really think the comment from one of the previous commentators about what is it individual generations doing to promote what they're good at. I mean, I slightly go back to the concept of, for example, digital natives and digital immigrants. People have different capabilities, but also people have different perceptions of different generations according to those elements. So we need to be jolly careful in how we design the stuff and make it specific for the outputs and outcomes we're trying to deliver.
And
Yeah,
one point, sorry.
No, I was just going to add one thing before you come back, Mike. So on the military thing, I remember even when we did have a retirement age of 55 in Gulf War One, I was in the Jaguar Force most of that time. I was actually on exchange for Gulf War One, but we had a pilot on the Jaguar Force who was 53, who was a professional aviator, a specialist pilot, had stayed in he was one of the few that was in the front line as opposed to in a training role. And although he was, everything went fine, he was the first to say afterwards that he kind of went, yeah, do you know what? Maybe this is better off for people, slightly younger guys to do this, because there's an old dog's new tricks thing. But at the same time, I think it was it was definitely a bit more than he felt he really should be handling at his age. So I think there is a be careful what you wish for thing with some of these jobs. There is a slight desire that everybody should be able to do everything. We have to open up all these opportunities, but we do need to be a bit careful.
The point I was going to make was that I think one thing we have to consider is decoupling retirement with a specific age. We should see how we can do it based on motivation, ability, commitment. And one thing we have to be very careful. I mean, I don't know the background of all the people on the call, but I know I've been privileged enough to have a desk job all of my life. And many of the people I talk with on this topic also come from desk-based jobs and are not people who are, working on a building site or working, I think, in other physically demanding jobs where we don't necessarily always perceive them to be as physically demanding. So in the health service and other areas. And what we need to do is to find ways where we can help people stay healthy and active longer. One of the facts that's always stuck in my mind from research I did when I was at Aegon and looked at people with physically demanding jobs was that 40% of people retired before their planned retirement age. And that the main reasons for that were job loss. And we've seen how difficult it is to get back into the job market, but ill health was the second one. So the more we can help people stay healthy longer and make sure that their skills are up to date, we can enable them to stay economically active longer, and that's very important. But we do need to see how we can work on people's skills to make sure that we identify the transferable skills and find ways so that they can stay working in a way that they feel they're making a contribution, but we're not overburdening them in terms of setting a date or an age which may not be achievable for them. But it is a topic, an aspect of this conversation that I think we need to be cautious and make sure that we don't make too many generalizations on.
Totally agree. Anyone got anything else?
It's been a super presentation. Lots in the chat, brilliantly fielded. And really, again, Mike's been extremely generous in his time. What is it now? 7:10. Probably we all need a drink. It's 8:10 in Amsterdam. Perhaps we can join Mike over there and have a really good night out in Amsterdam. But here we are on murky Merseyside, or I am. Can I ask everyone to just unmute yourselves, please, and let's give Mike a real TLC round of applause, please.
Thank you very much.